I'm now going to speak to Jackie Kohnstamm, and it always feels a real honour to speak to anyone who has any experience in their family to do with the Holocaust. And Jackie's book, even though I've read several biographies and memories to do with families who've had Holocaust experiences, either people who've lived through it or people whose ancestors and family members have lived through it, it just never gets any less poignant, even though I have no family connections myself with it. And I think it kind of makes us ask deep questions of ourselves, of history, and how we treat each other. So Jackie, I'm really honoured to speak to you today about your book, The Memory Keeper, which is subtitled A Journey into the Holocaust to Find My Family. And there's many different strands I'd like to talk to you about. And the first one is perhaps not so much of a serious one, but it's one of those quirky aspects of family history that many of us will recognise. So I found when I started reading your book, the opening pages just caught me, and it's so remarkable. So often in family history, how often we come across coincidences and chance moments and serendipity. And very often we just put it down and go, isn't it a small world? And we kind of dismiss it. And then sometimes these chance moments feel as though they're part of something bigger. And, you know, they can kind of literally give you the shivers up your arms and legs. And so just to set the scene, do you want to tell us a little bit about your chance moment? And then from there, kind of maybe explain, you know, set your family's, the scene of your family about why there was. Just tell us about your chance moment, how you started on the journey, I guess.
Well, the chance moment happened one winter's evening, and I noted the date of it. It was the 4th of December, 2005, so it's going back quite a while. And for no particular reason, I was on my way to bed and I switched on the computer and I Googled my mother's maiden name. And it was an unusual name, I mean, certainly for the UK, a Polish name, Ryszwalski. And but what I wasn't expecting was just to find my grandparents there, my grandparents' names with their address in Berlin, where I knew they had lived, and that there were these two memorial stones which were called Stolpersteine, which had been placed in their name. And this is it's now become quite well known, and there are loads of them throughout Germany and also throughout European countries where sadly Jews were not only Jews but political opponents of the Third Reich and gay and lesbian. I mean, you know, anyone who was persecuted, where they were taken and memorials in front of the front door where they lived. And I was just so amazed, and with the dates of their birth and deportation and death. And I checked on my own records. I thought, gosh, this is absolutely right, but who on earth has done that? Because as it happens, I mean, I am the only grandchild that my grandparents had, and in the interim, everybody had died. I thought there's no one that I know who could have done this. So that is what began the journey. And when I looked on the website where I found the memorials, it said they had been placed on the 30th of November of that year, which was only 4 days previously. And what was
remarkable.
It was remarkable. And then, of course, the next morning I phoned up because it had a contact number and gave the people who had done it a tremendous shock. I said, well, you don't know me, but, you know, this is my name, but, you know, my grandparents were so-and-so. And, you know, we only did this a few days ago. And I said, well, I realized that from what I saw on the website, but why? And who are you? And that's what started the journey. And so I felt I had to go and meet them. And although we corresponded first and phoned, and about a month or two later, I went to Berlin, and that's how the whole thing started. But I would say one thing. You ask about coincidence, and I still think it's coincidence. I mean, you know, I don't believe in great cosmic forces. I don't know. I don't understand enough about it. I know there are, as you say, these serendipitous moments, and I can't explain it. But a few months before that, I had been getting out. I'd got out the old photos. I'd been starting to write bits and pieces about them, about the family, because I felt I needed to get to grips with things, but I didn't really know what I was doing or why. And somehow finding those Stolpersteine was the galvanizing thing. That's what sort of set me off. You know, it's like lighting the blue touch paper, and whoosh, off I went.
So just to explain about the Stolpersteine. So you said that one thing really struck you was the word ermordet. Is that the correct word, ermordet, which I think is German for murdered. So partly you were seeing an event in your family history written extremely starkly, like it wasn't made more palatable. It was just stated as a fact using
precisely
no niceties about the vocabulary used. And then the Stolpersteine is part of a nationwide, and I think you might have said beyond Germany as well, movement to recognise people who were removed from their homes because of the Holocaust. And so literally to put these stumbling stones in the pavement to catch people's attention today, to draw us up short and remember the people at the homes where they last lived. That's right, isn't it?
That's right. I mean, the point is, and that is, what is extremely important for Gunter Demnig, who's the artist who started all this off, and for all the volunteers, it's an army of volunteers who do all the research for these, is that they find the correct address, because very often what the Nazis did in order to be efficient and mop up Jews very, in one go, they made them move into certain houses, which were called Judenhäuser or Jew houses. So that will be their last address before they are deported. And what for this memorial was important was that it should be the last real address where they lived and walked in freedom. And so that takes a bit of research to find where they actually, where their real home was before they were forced to move to their last residence before deportation. And the power of the thing, of the memorial, is that they are placed in the pavement outside the front door of that last home. And so, we are dealing here with the disappeared, with people who were dehumanized and made to disappear off the face of the earth. And so the idea is to bring them back in this little Stolperstein, in this little memorial stone, in where their feet walked, where they trod, and that is the idea, and I think the power of them as well.
And they're inescapable because they're part of all of our everyday lives and as you walk the streets. And you mentioned a few times there the word before, and you said this was very much a sense that you had through your childhood, that your family's life had been kind of segmented into before and after, and then this other space of in between before and after. And so how defining the experience of life in Germany and having to leave Germany, if you could leave, or the people who never did manage to leave, and that kind of traumatic impact on your parents, particularly on your mother, because it was your mother's parents who
that's right,
perished. So can you tell us a bit about really just that sense of those phases and how, like, the burden that your mother carried, I guess, because that's evident from your book.
Yes. Well, yes, as I say, I mean, as I grew up, it was a gradual realization of what must have happened to my mother's parents. I knew they must be dead, but I also knew all my father's family, much smaller family, got out. And I knew that grandmother, my father's mother, well. I didn't know that grandfather because he had died before I was born, but there was no mystery about it. That was just mentioned and he was dead, and that was the end of that. Whereas with my mother's parents and also the wider family, there was something that just was uncomfortable. And as a child, you pick up vibes. I mean, we all do with that, and certain things that you have to be careful about, and you don't quite know why, and you tiptoe around it. And this is how it was for me. And then gradually I began to put two and two together. And it was all to do with this time of what, as you brought up just now, of in between, sort of in between before, which was exciting, my parents' youth, dangerous. I knew about the Nazis, they'd escaped, hurrah, here they were, they'd survived, blah, 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 all wonderful. And then the rather boring, grey, post-war world that I was born in and grew up in, which was safe. I was safe. I went to school, everything was, you know, we had enough to eat, all the things that did. And then there was this kind of area between before and their world of before and my world of after, which was a bit kind of uncomfortable. And I didn't quite know, you know, who these people were that I saw them in a, we had a shoebox with black and white photos, and I would ask, who's this and who's that? So they were all these members of my mother's family who didn't exist anymore.
Mm.
And there were a few who did, I mean, who I knew, but only one or two. And they were also scattered all over the place in different countries. So we didn't see them very frequently. There were letters that came. So it was like an atmosphere, I would say, more of this in between. And so I don't know how well I'm explaining this to you.
No, you are explaining it, because so as a child, you're growing up with this, basically, it's a chapter missing out of your family history, isn't it? And
Yeah.
it's a very uneasy chapter, and you know it's kind of a chapter you're not allowed to open. And it's, as time goes on, even if when you get older, it doesn't make it any easier to broach. And you write in the book about how you do broach this topic when you're, I think, 11 or 12 years old,
Yeah.
with your parents, and it's stormy, isn't it? Like it's not an easy, it's a very raw wound for your mother to have to speak about.
That's right.
And later on, you're saying about you kind of looked to your mother, I think, to try and get to grips with that chapter of your family history, with the Holocaust in your family, by kind of almost reading or watching her, how she experienced it. But she's very much a closed book on it, isn't it? It's too hard for her to deal with, so she just tries to keep everything under wraps. So you, as a daughter and as a family historian, everything's closed, the past is kind of closed off to you. All you have is this understanding that your family is part of a huge piece of the past, part of the Holocaust. But then you speak about how you piece it together. You do find out that there are letters were written. And I was wondering whether perhaps your mother, there's definitely, you're going to have survivor guilt, aren't you? Like any of us would do, because
absolutely. I'm sure that's part of it. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So like this is, it's very moving as well, but you also had to do very practical things. So you had some paper trail records, and you knew, as you say, you knew of a network of family members who had survived. So can you tell us a little bit about how, just the practical side of how you went about piecing together?
Sure. Well, also you need to remember that this happened over a very long period of time, because quite rightly, you say I broached it to my parents, and in fact it was my father I asked, you know, how did mummy's parents die? I knew I shouldn't ask my mother. I just thought this was a dangerous area, and that's how I found out. So I was 11. Okay, so life kind of goes on, and I grow up, and I once asked my mother, are there any letters from your parents? No, you know, there was nothing, because she had thrown everything away. That was her way of dealing with it. But what I didn't know until very much later, when I was an adult, was that my aunt and uncle, who lived in different countries, my mother's older siblings, she was the youngest of three, they had kept a lot. My uncle was a hoarder. He threw absolutely nothing away, including all his electricity and gas bills, I can still remember. And my aunt had a great sense of history and what was important, and also of herself and what she wanted known about herself. She wanted to be known. And she was a very active, busy kind of, and very perceptive person. I mean, I think without her, quite possibly the others wouldn't have survived. She really led, she had a difficult relationship with my grandparents. So that also comes into the book. So that is one of the reasons she kept everything. And all this came my way over decades. And then it took me a while and I didn't feel, and that's probably a psychological thing, I didn't feel free to deal with it. I didn't quite know how to deal with it while my mother was alive. And also, practically, I couldn't read my grandparents' letters because of the handwriting. It was the old German script. I could have got somebody to interpret them for me, but I didn't feel able to. So really, it was only once, and then once everybody had died of that generation, it felt like a tremendous weight. It was a responsibility. I thought, well, let me give everything to an archive, to a museum, and yet I couldn't quite bring myself to do that either. So it was like, it took a long time. And then it was when I found these memorials online, that was what broke the spell. And because I suppose it was that I was no longer, because I'm an only child, I had all the responsibility myself. I had no one to share this with. And suddenly, these unknown people in Berlin who'd done these Stolpersteine for my grandparents, they were there. They were kind of helping, and they wanted to know, they wanted photos. They wanted to know more about the family. And it suddenly felt like, oh, this is wonderful. I'm getting some assistance here. And they weren't the only ones. And that's what I then end up writing the book about as well, not only about the family, because I thought this was such an interesting part of it, which I totally unexpected, that I got all this interest and help and encouragement, really, from the Germans of my generation and younger, and I thought, well, actually, we are two sides of the same coin, because they have also grown up tiptoeing around a difficult subject, not knowing what their parents and grandparents might have done in the war. Sometimes they do know. Sometimes being involved with the Stolpersteine is to make amends for, their family having had Nazi members. So there is an emotional understanding, I think, for this in Germany, which I was unprepared for, and it was actually very welcome. It was a very positive thing.
I think you're so right, Jackie. I mean, family history is it's a funny old hobby, because it can seem as though it's kind of, people who haven't embarked on any family history of any sort, it can seem as though it's a little bit dry and dusty, but it's far from it. And for many people, for many different reasons, probably most extremely people who have family members who are have been part of the Holocaust, but many other reasons as well, it can be hugely cathartic and help people make sense of time and themselves and who went before. And I think you're right, that kind of feeling of not being alone is very reassuring. And I think you're very wise to and compassionate to see that it is two sides of the same coin. I think that maybe not a situation that everybody could reach, but that's, yes, I think it's got to be helpful for the future, because a bit chillingly in your book, you did mention on one of your trips to Berlin about the kind of rise of anti-Semitism. Like it's a theme which has come and gone through history.
It will not end. I mean, I'm quite convinced of that. It's just, it's been going on for 2,000 years. It comes and it goes, and I think that's another reason why I'm very glad this is being published, because I just think it's so important for people to be aware of how gradually these things can build up. And the wish, very tragically, of my grandparents not to believe it, not to believe this was going to happen. We're going to go back to normal civilized life. This is a blip, and of course it wasn't. So I just think one has to be aware.
I think you're absolutely right, especially with the state of the world in Europe at the moment. And yeah, you're right. So thank you so much, Jackie, for sharing some thoughts on your book. If anybody would like to buy the book, it's available in hardback and as a Kindle edition as well, isn't it? And hardback's £18.99, Kindle edition is £9.49. And Jackie's book is called The Memory Keeper, and Jackie's surname is Kohnstamm, and I'll put all the details below the video link.
And can I say there'll also be an audio book as well.
Ah, excellent. Okay, will you be narrating it or somebody else?
Me.
You will. Excellent. That always means more when it's your author's own voice. So thank you very much for your time then.
You're very welcome.